Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and today I was going to film something totally different than I am today, but I did get two things in the mail that changed everything that I wanted to do today. The first thing was an invoice, but that's not what really changed my mind. What really changed my mind were these two cute charm packs that came in the mail. The invoice, I used the back of it and I designed a pattern. And I really couldn't rest until I started to work on this. So this is the pattern I'm going to follow, but I'm going to make it a lot easier for you. And this is going to be so easy to make. We're going to need one charm pack, which is 42 5-inch squares. And we're going to need a background fabric. We're going to be able to use 14 2.5-inch strips of fabric. That's all there is. That's going to give us a quilt with 2 borders. This is going to be a real fun project. So out of these 2 packs, I did choose this Gnome fabric from Wilmington. And I like that they're all fairly dark, so there's going to be a high contrast. Out of the background fabric, cut 32 pieces at 2.5-inch square, 32 pieces at 5 by 2.5-inch square. And for the borders, we're going to need 4 pieces cut 2.5 inches by 32.5 inches, and 4 pieces 2.5 inches by 36.5 inches. And those borders might change depending on your quilt. So for this project, we are going to need to take out 32 squares from that charm pack. Now I will be choosing patterns that I do not want to cut up. And that's going to leave me 10 extra squares, and these will be cut to 2.5-inch squares. So I will have 32 5-inch squares and 40 2.5-inch squares. A big question about these pre-cut squares is, where is the true measurement? Does it start on the outside? Does it start on the inside of those pinked edges? Well, each company does have it a little bit different. And because we're going to be cutting these in half twice, I would just recommend taking just one square to the iron, fold it in half, iron it, and iron it again. And just use those iron marks as a guide to cut your squares. We're going to be able to trim these down so they're going to be exact. For this particular 5-inch square, that measurement is going to the inside of that pinked square. But we don't have to trim them off. We're going to be able to trim them all down later. When we do cut these 5-inch squares apart, we will have 2 edges that have that pinked edge and 2 edges that are going to be a straight cut. Match up all of those squares so we have all of the straight edges on one and those pinked edges match on another. I did cut the background fabrics all from a 2.5-inch jelly roll. So I do have 2 ends pinked and 2 ends with a flat cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match up those 2 pinked edges together, and that's going to give me a straight cut right along that top and along that edge. So those pinked edges are going to match. So to sew them together, I'm going to just match up those straight edges along that top and that pinked edge. And I'm not going to worry if there's anything hanging on the outside. So we're going to match up the top edge and the pink edge. When I do sew that seam, I'm going to use the 1/4-inch measurement right from the outside, not from the inside of that little point. And that just gives me a little bit more space. You can see that the edges are not going to match, and that's okay. We're going to press these so the seams are going to go to that dark side. So we have a smooth cut on the right, a smooth cut along the top. To match that rectangle, match up the smooth edge, so that that right hand side is equal. Match up that top edge and stitch along this edge. That's going to keep that one edge straight, and don't worry about having anything hanging over on the outside. Once again, I'm using the measurement from the outside for that 1/4 inch. This piece was 5 inches, so we do have a little bit hanging over, and that's okay because that's just going to give us a little space to trim off. That 5-inch square is now going to get stitched right on that edge. And yes, we're going to have it a little bit too big. When we do sew this together, we just need to match it up to whatever the shortest edge is going to be. And in my case, it's that straight cut 2.5 inch. And stitch that 1/4 inch. This is going to be half of a block. We're going to make the identical piece and turn it sideways to match the bottom. So we do need to straighten up this one bottom edge. So once we have all 32 of these pieces done, use that straight edge and trim a straight line. I'm not taking off that much, I'm just straightening it up. So I only have that one edge trimmed up. Now I'm going to be able to put these together, match up that side seam, and you don't have to match up anything else. So those seams will nestle together. And this time we have a straight edge that we're going to use that 1/4 inch seam allowance. I did press the first seam going towards that darker square, the second seam up to the background fabric, and the third seam going towards that large piece. And that way, when I did match them up, I was able to match up that center seam. And now I can open up a couple of threads right here in that center and press those seams going in opposite directions. And that is what the square is going to look like. Now, of course, we could always trim all of this down so that they fit right at the beginning, but I'd rather trim them down now and have them all exactly the same size. I'm going to use that center point and trim off all of that extra. This should be able to be squared up to an 8.5 inch block, and that's a common size for rulers. So I do have an 8.5 inch square. I have an X coming down the center, so I'll be able to find that center mark and put it right in the center and then trim off that extra. If you do not have an 8.5 inch square, your measurement will be 4 1/4 inch from that side. So you can take any ruler and measure over 4 1/4 inches, match up that straight line at 4 1/4 and trim. So you're going to be able to do 4 1/4 all the way around. But I do happen to have a 4.5, so I'm just going to match up my straight lines, find my center, and if you don't have a center, you can put a little piece of tape on the top of the ruler and put a little X. Line it up and trim those off. If it doesn't fit an 8.5 inch, well, trim it down to 8 inches. Whatever you can trim it down, it's going to be fine. Having that little extra just sort of gave me some insurance that I didn't cut off an end, and I would have had to trim these one at a time if I did them first. Now I can do them all at once. We now have 16 of these blocks. They can range from 8.5 inches, 8 1/4 inches to 8 inches. It won't matter. Once they're trimmed all the same size, we're going to be able to put these together. We can put them together so all of the small squares are going in the same direction. So they're all pointing in that same direction. We can change them so we have the small squares going opposite. And when we do that, we end up with these circular shapes. And that is the look that I'm looking for. So it sort of looks like Christmas wreaths. Now we can have fun and change up some of these patterns. Then sew those blocks together so we have 4 sets of 4 and then put them together. If you're able to trim those blocks to 8.5 inches, your quilt should equal 32.5 inches. If yours is different, you can just adjust that size. This is a square, so all of our pieces will be the same. We will be able to sew those around the quilt and put cornerstones on each end. When the first border is done, we're going to be able to duplicate that border, and our strip should equal 36.5 inches. So we will also put a little square on each side. So we're going to have 2 borders with these 2.5 inch squares all the way around. That border is now done, and we were able to use up all 42 pieces of these 5-inch pre-cuts. If you prefer to cut these pieces to the exact size, the larger squares need to be cut at 4.5 inches. We still have those 2.5 inch squares. This is a 2.5 inch, but it's cut at 4.5 inches. And then they will fit together exactly. I just find instead of trimming them first, trimming them last saves some time. But either way will work really well. This was a fun quilt to make. I was able to use up all 42 of those squares, and it does equal approximately 40 inches. Even though some of these fabrics were directional fabrics, I did not worry about the direction. Matter of fact, I did mix them up because I didn't want the quilt to have one angle. I wanted you to be able to look at it in any angle and have it look like it's correct. And that way it's going to fit on a table or a couch, anywhere that I want to put it, and you're not going to notice that all of these things are in the right direction. It's all mixed up, so it looks great from any angle. Now that the top is done, I need to get this quilted so I can go back to what I was originally going to do for the video. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're working on next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.